Yeah, good morning, good afternoon to any of you joining out from other time zones. Hopefully not good evening, but it's really great to have you all here. And for our session today on Nutanix NC2 or Nutanix Cloud Clusters, NC2 technology, and our session on the future strategy in this space. So with that, I'd want to do a quick round of introductions so you know those who are on the call today. So my name is Franz Esser. I'm the Strategic Business Manager at ETWorks. I've been working with Nutanix for over 11 years now, deploying solutions both on-prem and in the cloud across the EMEA region. We've got about 50 or so Nutanix ETWorks customers, a few hundred nodes deployed across about 32 countries, I think the last time I counted. Over to you, Jon.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jon Moore. I'm a technical account manager at ETWorks. So sit very similarly to Franz, although I tend to get involved a lot more in some of the edge computing and kind of the standard data center. But you know, we kind of live and breathe NC2 as part of our day-to-day discussions now, as it's become such a big part of what we do. Over to you, Ross.
Hello, I'm Ross Holliday. I am one of the directors of a company called Expert Thinking. We are a very close partner of ETWorks. We are an AWS and Azure professional services partner.
Perfect, and I'll finish off as well. So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Callum Muskelly. I am the pre-sales engineer at Nutanix, and I work closely with the channel team, so likes of ETWorks as well. And yeah, welcome to this morning's session.
Great, thank you all. So with that, I'm going to do a quick run through of the agenda. So we've just covered off the introductions. I'm going to give you a brief overview of who ETWorks is for those who aren't familiar. We're going to then look at some of the main takeaways from the DTX conference where Jon and Ross myself attended recently. After that, I'm going to provide a very high-level overview of NC2 for those of you who aren't familiar with it. Jon's going to then cover off the latest and greatest on NC2, new feature announcements and capabilities that have come out in the last year. Then we'll hand over to Ross, who will be talking about how you can get funding for an NC2 POC in either AWS or Azure and what the sort of implementation plan is around that. And then Callum's going to end it off with an actual walkthrough of the Nutanix NC2 technology by means of a demo and kind of give you an idea of how you could do your own test drive on the platform. And then lastly, we'll have a bit of time for a Q&A. So thanks again to all of you who've joined. I see there's quite a few more that have come on since we kicked off the introductions. So who are ETWorks? Just briefly, for those of you who don't know us, I know there's many on the call who are familiar with ETWorks, but for those of you who don't, we'd classify ourselves as digital transformation specialists. We've been around about 30 years now as a company. We have offices in the UK and the Nordics and in South Africa, and tend to focus on the EMEA geography, but we have customers as far as Asia Pacific and North America that we service out of our offices. And I think, you know, if you look at the sort of services wheel on the right-hand side, you can get an idea of the the breadth of services that ETWorks offers. If I could characterize us as a company, because probably that's what you really want to know about us, I'd say we're big enough to count and small enough to care. We're not seeking to compete with some of the massive resellers out there. Our focus is very much technical solution driven. All of the salespeople at ETWorks, we're not really salespeople. We'll come from an engineering or an IT ops background. And I think that's what is part of our DNA and our success as a result of that, because we understand customer problems and work to engineer solutions for those. So that's probably in a nutshell what we offer. If you want to know more about our services, we don't really have time to go into the detail of that, but we'd happily pick that up with you after the call if you want to know more.
Yeah, and obviously one of the things we promised you if you came along today is the chance to receive a Lego Formula One car as a kind of thank you for taking part in the webinar and the Nutanix test drive. The link you can see on the screen, which I will also post in the chat while I'm talking. Once the webinar is completed, if you go onto the test drive via that link, it's important you go via that link because that's how we're going to add up the two. We'll then send you out one of these. So it's a nice little Lego kit, the Formula One car. and you should get that. I can't promise before Christmas, but I think you should get it within about 4 weeks. So you should get it before Christmas. At the end, I'll post that link again. If you have any questions, do email the link. We're really keen. You know, you've come to the webinar. You're going to do the test drive. Really keen that you get your reward, because I told Nutanix that we were going to get rid of lots of these cars, which they said, "Oh, that's absolutely fine." So please prove me right and make sure Nutanix have to send lots out. I guess if we, yeah, so one of the things we wanted to do, so we've just come back from DTX, digital transformation down in the Excel, lots of infrastructure and cloud-based discussions going on there across the hall, and I guess part of what we wanted to do was kind of put NC2 in context in terms of some of those conversations. So I guess, Franz, if I hand over to you, what were some of the conversations or some of the key points that you pulled out from that?
I was waiting for you to make a comment on that photo that you managed to take with me in secret, John. So that's kind of why I let you talk, get yourself into some trouble there. But yeah, so as John said, you know, it was really good to see you know, yourself and Ross there, and a few other people. I see Mo came specifically off the track to come and visit you at the stand to find out about how you're solving cloud problems, John. So great chat there.
Thanks so much.
So yeah, before we kind of get onto the whole NC2 topic, I wanted to ask both of you, you know, just give me maybe a quick summary of your main takeaways from the conversations you had at DTX.
I'll let you go, Ross.
Yeah, okay, well, you two talked so much already, and I thought I'd jump in. Thank you, John. I think it was a kind of an event which I've been to before, but I think this was definitely a small, medium, and large event where there was a lot of very small customers, probably hawking freebies from the stands more than ever. I did let John know on how to spot them, but actually there were some really interesting customers. There's three main topics I found. I think VDI, you know, what to do with kind of, you know, desktop compute, and I won't go into that space, John, probably far more your space. Migrations and DR. So I think customers I was speaking to and conversations that kind of were brought to me were, there's a lot of people kind of now looking at kind of migrating to the cloud for the usual reasons, right? Usual reasons that we probably all heard of for the last 20 years since VMware was announced. So mainly that was around kind of closing data centers or creating a more dynamic kind of more cost efficient kind of network, really. Second one was DR. Sorry, third one was DR. We do a lot with DR, a lot with Nutanix in the cloud on NC2 with DR. Seems to be the first and use case which most people want to talk about nowadays, where we can kind of, you know, extend your Nutanix cluster into the cloud and then kind of move workloads around. There was a lot of conversations around that. I guess we're kind of known for that to bring the funding to bear to help to do that. But I thought it was a pretty decent event. Yeah, those three topics were the main ones for me.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, so interestingly, still a lot of talk about Broadcom, and that's changed slightly from people just being concerned about the cost, the cost ramp on whatever portfolio they're using, and a lot more about the kind of ever-changing landscape. So you know, there's been kind of 3 or 4 major changes in the way that Broadcom is pricing all the products that are available over the last couple of years. And I think people are just very uncertain about that in terms of, well, what next? If I'm going to buy in for another 3 years, what does that look like? So that was quite interesting. And you know, very on topic in terms of the conversation today, I spoke to quite a large customer who you know, got into cloud fairly early and spent nearly 4 years trying to organize a kind of seamless DR between Azure and AWS, because they didn't want to be beholden to one cloud, and pretty much gave up after 4 years because they just couldn't do a seamless transition. And it was one of those odd conversations, because then when we had a 5-minute conversation about what NC2 can actually achieve, they were like, well, that's exactly what we spent 4 years trying to do that we gave up on in the end. We don't want to go back to that place. We now realize that we're in one cloud and that's all we can do. So yeah, really interesting in the fact that, people were spotting that and trying to do it rather than necessarily just staying in one cloud provider. What about you, Franz?
Yeah, well, when I wasn't busy on a Teams call, as you managed to catch me out, John, I did manage to walk around the other stands. You kind of saw a lot of the same companies as last year, one or two new names, but what I did notice that everybody had a kind of "We Do AI" badge at the top right-hand corner of their stands, their banners. And I'd have to say we're probably guilty of that as well at ET Works. We call out the fact that we do data and AI solutions. I think the bit that I would like to kind of, get out of the way with that is that there's a lot of hype around AI, and everyone has to kind of say we do AI to remain sounding relevant. But what I do really like about our partnership with Nutanix, and particularly if you look at the wider ET Works services, ecosystem, where we've been doing, data management services for the past 30 years. It's part of our DNA and our bread and butter. But now with the whole advent of AI, how can you make that a practical solution? How can you address an actual business problem? And what I like about the partnership with Nutanix is that with, solutions like ChatGPT in a box, we can immediately create a value-adding solution with a definitive cost and a very clear timescale, which is very short, by the way, to getting that value out. So, the practical aspects of AI. Now, the challenge really is for our customers is to go find those use cases that their business needs, and then we can help translate that into, a solution with the technology that we work with. And also to your point around Broadcom, John, I spoke to quite a few customers who are struggling to work out what their cloud strategy should be, and which partners do they work with in a sort of post-Broadcom world, for a better way of framing it. And that kind of, I think, segues into the conversation we're having today around NC2, because an inevitable part of that will be, well, if Broadcom isn't part of our mix anymore, where do we go? What hypervisor do we choose? Do we go to the cloud? All those kind of big questions are up for grabs at the moment. So with Nutanix NC2, we're going to go straight into that now. For those of you who are not familiar with the technology, Nutanix Cloud Clusters, that's what NC2 stands for, is essentially a technology that Nutanix have developed in collaboration with the likes of AWS and Azure. So it's a co-engineering effort. And their approach is very much different to perhaps the equivalent VMware in the cloud services that historically existed, because Nutanix's capability is built on top of native services that already exist in AWS and Azure. So native compute and storage and networking stacks in those environments. And the idea behind NC2 is to create a common data center operating system, is how I would frame it, that operates in the same way across both the private and the public cloud environment. So what do I mean by that? You have a single unified management console. So you've got true multi-cloud management capabilities with a single point of entry, whether your workload is running on-prem, AWS or Azure. You've got the same set of policies, same set of security frameworks, the same set of controls around your data migration and replication. All of those are managed through Prism Central, which is a Nutanix management overlay. The idea is that you want to enable the capability to do a one-click virtual machine migration from on-premise to the cloud or back again, or you can even fail over an entire data center from on-premise into the cloud and back again, without having to deal with all the complex, networking infrastructure overheads that are inherent in that, as to the example that was given earlier with the customer trying to do a failover from AWS to Azure. That isn't really possible with the native technologies. Nutanix makes that entirely possible, and in fact very easy, and uniquely does so in that space. Another benefit of using Nutanix NC2 technology in the cloud is that you can actually leverage existing tenancies that you've got there, or credits. So whether you've got an AWS cloud commit or a Microsoft Mac agreement, you can actually leverage those agreements, and you can purchase the Nutanix software through their marketplaces, and you can deploy it within a matter of minutes, as you would expect. Any kind of cloud technology, everything is driven through your portal, and the provisioning of infrastructure, networking, the deployment of the Nutanix licenses. All of that can be done completely online and in a matter of minutes, and you've got your cloud data center up and running. So Callum is going to go into a little bit more detail on this a little bit later in terms of how NC2 glues together and actually give us a bit of a demo on this. But just at a very high level, you can see in this diagram on the right hand side here that from Nutanix private cloud perspective, we have been building those now for over 11 years. And we run Nutanix private cloud solutions on top of all the major hardware platforms that are out there. We have customers running on Dell, Supermicro, Fujitsu, Lenovo, HPE. So that's entirely your choice in terms of the hardware provider. And now with NC2, the choice of cloud provider is the same. Whether you want to go from on-prem to AWS or on-prem to Azure or AWS to Azure, all of those are possibilities with the Nutanix NC2 software fabric running as a cloud platform, a hybrid cloud, multi-cloud platform across all of those environments. And of course, hooking into all of the native cloud services that you're already using today and making that part of your wider solution ecosystem in the cloud. So I guess the next question is, why would you do this? Why add an additional software layer with Nutanix, which obviously there is a cost to the Nutanix licensing because of the value that it adds. So what we're really finding is that we can actually deliver significant savings with the NC2 offering. So it's not just about all those capabilities that I mentioned, but also the savings up to 50% of whatever your current cloud consumption bill is, whether that's in Azure or AWS. I have a number of clients that have realized anything between 20 to 50% savings by moving to the NC2 platform and migrating their cloud native workloads into NC2 in Azure or AWS. And one of the ways that Nutanix does that is through this concept of eliminating cloud micro waste. Now that's from a compute perspective. So when you look at the cloud today, you typically have a fixed set of instance sizes or t-shirt sizes. And if you look at that, diagram, but I've kind of tried to explain how that would work. You may have a virtual machine that requires 1 vCPU or 1 gig of memory, but the closest, instance that you can find in the cloud will have 1 vCPU and 2 gigs of memory. You don't need that extra gig of memory, but you're going to pay for it whether you want it or not. So Nutanix NC2 eliminates that because you can do dynamic right sizing for your virtual machine to tailor it to the exact requirements of the workload. So liken it to a t-shirt size versus a tailor-made suit. So with NC2, you get the tailor-made suit, so there is none of this cloud micro wastage, and you optimize your investment. And similarly, when it comes to storage, if you look at the way cloud storage is consumed and paid for today, you can't blame the cloud companies, right? They're there to make money. So what they will do is they will charge you for every byte and every bit that you store in their cloud. So if you have, a piece of data, let's say it's a terabyte's worth of data, you take a clone of that data, you're going to be paying for another terabyte. You take a snapshot, you'll be paying for another terabyte. That's how those cloud costs on storage accumulate very quickly. When you deploy the Nutanix software fabric into the cloud, you're then able to leverage all of the Nutanix distributed storage system intelligence. That includes things like compression, deduplication, erasure coding, all the storage efficiencies, zero space snapshots and clones that Nutanix offers on premise now become available in the cloud. So in that example over there, you'd still have the base data of a terabyte. If you take a clone, it's only the delta changes from the original base terabyte and between that and the clone. So there isn't any additional storage consumed. If you take a snapshot of that data, again, it's only the delta changes that are stored. So you're optimizing your storage footprint in the cloud. In fact, you can even gain back because we can compress that data. So you might gain 30% reduction in your storage footprint through the compression algorithms in Nutanix. So all of that accumulated, there's those sort of, don't want you to imagine this as a black box. There's very real physics and maths involved in terms of how we actually deliver those savings. And obviously that results in the cost savings that you achieve once you go up into the cloud. So Jon, I'm going to hand over to you now to take us through the latest and greatest.
Yeah, absolutely, Franz. So a lot of you on the call will already know about NC2, so I thought it was kind of important to talk about kind of what's changing in NC2 and where they're going with it. Pretty much like every month, there's another couple of announcements. So yeah, it's definitely a product that's building quickly. So the first one, starting from the left, is Google Cloud support. So GCP. To be honest, we've talked about this for a long time, and depending on which zone you were in, it depended on whether you could kind of move over in terms of the beta program and everything else. But that's now fully available in GA. It's currently on the Z3 bare metal instance, but effectively gives you that same tie-in that you would have with Azure and AWS. For some customers, it's their principal cloud platform, and there's where the interest is. For others, it gives them an alternative to either AWS or Azure. From AWS perspective, we have metro availability. So, effectively that's a zero-touch disaster recovery solution where we can assure continuous operation even with a complete site failure. The automatic failover is done by a witness where we would host that in a separate fault domain, which really gives us a lot of resilience and reliability in terms of the way that we can fail over between those zones rather than allowing, if you like, the zones to do that themselves. Azure, we have something called multi-snap technology, which allows us effectively to take data from a cluster and write it to blob buckets, S3 blob buckets. The advantage of that really is that you don't need any compute to be able to get that DR copy in the cloud ready to spin up. We can also use that in a combination of elastic SAN, so NVMe storage. So for tier 1 applications, we can have a mix of what we call a pilot-like cluster, so the smallest cluster available for you to be able to run that DR service, and then build out using both MST and cloud native NVMe, which gives us a much more flexible window. In the past, we'd have been talking about adding more nodes just to increase storage. That, of course, adds the core count, increases the license cost. So we can really tune that provision now for your workload. And that really comes down to that TCO piece. It allows us to further push against the, we talk about the difference in cost. Franz mentioned it in terms of the micro waste and the disk space. We can further reduce that native cloud cost by using a combination of these tools.
Thanks, Jon. It might be worth mentioning that those aren't the only regions that the AWS NC2 offering is available. Those are new regions. It is available globally.
Yes, yeah.
We have it available, for example, in South Africa, UK, Europe, and many others globally.
Yeah, and I thought it was also worth talking about, and again, it was a theme at the show that people talk about a lot. I would, of course, say I love Move. It's the best migration tool done by any vendor anywhere. But the significance of Move is we can not only seamlessly move from Hyper-V and ESX bare metal onto AHV in the data center. We're able to utilize Move to do exactly the same up into cloud. We can also do that, by the way, in terms of file systems. So if we move from a NAS technology into Nutanix files, we can do exactly the same. And in fact, we can now do that with ESX, NSX into Nutanix Flow, so similar kind of networking. So the tool is the tool really is A, simple to use, B, really effective, and allows us to do that migration live. So effectively, it synchronizes the data between the two and allows us to decide when we do the cutover. And I talk about this because probably migration is the single headache in all of it. If you're convinced that this is the right technology, the next one is, well, how do we onboard that technology and how do we migrate from what we currently have? Move is the tool that allows us to do that. And to give you an idea of how effective Move is, I don't think Franz and I have managed to sell consultancy to do migrations on the platform for some time now. In fact, I've been at ET Works for 4 years. I've never sold migration services. And the reason for that is we spend about half a day with you just building it so that you can get it running. Move a couple of test VMs. Once you've done it, you won't need our other than a bit of support in the background, you won't need our help to actually do the migration. And we're talking about quite large migrations. I'm sure Callum can pull out a few, but there was a council last year that moved 450 VMs in 3 weeks using their own internal staff. It wasn't, they didn't use an external company. But again, I think the important thing about that is we can move in and out of the cloud using that same technology. So as well as we can move out of Azure into Nutanix, we can move from on-prem into Azure, for instance. So really gives us flexibility in terms of not only that migration, but the future support of that. And I guess the only other two things I'll pick up before I move over to Ross. One of the big advantages of this kind of ecosystem is we no longer need a team of Azure specialists and a team of AWS specialists to be able to use those clouds. Once we've created those environments and put it in, all of the day two operations are being done on the Nutanix control plane, all of the governance, the compliance, the migration of VMs. And so it becomes, it becomes a far more kind of robust in terms of support staff. We don't need to have all of these kind of silos of knowledge that are helping do that. In terms of our ability to do that, so Franz, I can't take any credit for it, but I will on behalf of ETWorks. Franz moved two customers, but we were the first partner in the UK, Nutanix partner, to move customers from traditional data center into NC2, both on Azure and AWS. And so we've been doing this for quite some time. And I'm just about to hand over to Ross from Expert Thinking. But again, I think it's really important. We are experts in Nutanix. We make the joke that if you cut us on the inside like a stick of rock, it says Nutanix on the way through. We're all certified in Nutanix. We're all technical. Ross and his team bring us that, but in AWS and Azure, so that when we ever start a project and we start moving that through, we look at it from both ecosystems perspective and make sure that it's built correctly for your environment. So without delaying too much, Ross, I'll move over to you.
I just want to clarify, John, because you made it sound like I single-handedly moved those customers into Azure native. Very generous of you to think that highly of me, but there were other people involved, actually.
Yeah.
Cheers, John. So I just wanted to cover off in a few slides some of the use cases that we saw obviously at DTX, but also that we're seeing in real life as a team between ourselves and ETWorks. So we are seeing a huge amount of customers looking at cloud migration modernization using NC2, using Nutanix. That's obviously coming from the pressure, a lot of the Broadcom renewals and the pressures that are coming on from I guess cost savings, especially around the public sector environments. We've seen some real life horror stories around the VMware and Broadcom renewal, 300%, 400%, and increasing. Unfortunately, we don't see that changing really in the near future. That business model is not going to change from Broadcom's perspective. Cloud disaster recovery, absolutely. This is kind of the number one topic at the moment for us and for ETWorks in combination, where we're running POCs and moving very, very quickly to production for DR, with a lot of the kind of press at the moment around not just DR, but also kind of cybersecurity. This is becoming more and more important around having a secondary data center or a secondary kind of area to place your key workloads in. In the hyperscaler world, there's various different versions of this, from a cold backup to a pilot light to a full replication. As you go up the stack, cost goes up, benefit goes up as well. But of course, at that point in the middle, you'll get your business value. We can help with that. We can help understand what those workloads are, categorize the workloads, and work on kind of the migration path per workload in terms of full migration or for DR. Data center extension. Yeah, this is where you've got mainly kind of large pods of Nutanix and looking at kind of bursting into the cloud or bursting some of those workloads out. Again, a use case that's been more and more used around some of the DORA stuff and some of the kind of stuff around legislation. But again, all three in combination in most customers and Nutanix on-premise or cloud customers we're seeing. And more, right? This isn't an area that is slowing down. It's an area that's increasing. And I think that's a number of factors. One is because I think Nutanix in the market is certainly on the rise, and the confidence in the products and services is on the rise. The products on NC2 and the confidence around that is on the rise. Certainly as a group, we've been through the pain in terms of some of those early engagements around NC2. I think that experience will be valuable. So if anyone on the call who's had some experience kind of with the networking especially, or the initial setup around trying to extend into NC2. We've been there, we've done it, we've got the badges, we've probably got the Terraform code as well. So we can certainly help you with that. So if you have run a POC previously or looked at NC2 previously and kind of gone, okay, complex, that is not the case when you're working with an experienced partner like Expert Thinking and ET Works. We have that, we can bring that in spades to your project. So how do we kind of get you from A to Z quicker and quickly? So we have a pretty standard process. The hyperscalers like this process because we can drive from your customer project all the way through to business benefit very quickly. So an initial meeting to define the scope, usually an assessment, that can be lightweight. In terms of looking at kind of workloads, looking at kind of networking, looking at your maturity as an organization. Is as code correct? Is it not? Is there something we can do to help bring your team along? All those things around security and operability are really important. We always have an option to POC. Sometimes that from a customer point of view is to be like, well, you're saying it's working. Why do we need to POC it? Well, in some cases, absolutely, there's no need to POC. But in some cases, certainly around data center migration and modernization, we'd always encourage POC, really from a kind of proof point to show pilot migrations moving between the two clouds or between on-premise and cloud, and really to kind of gain your team's confidence, bring your team up to skills in terms of some of the nuances around that. And then we'll also deliver the migration. So to give you an idea, we had a public sector customer from left customer meeting all the way to deliver a full migration of production systems in the NHS in a production environment, 3 weeks. I'll get to the next slide to understand why that's important. So this is a very brief slide, but it's really important to say how our step-by-step process, and customers tend and always kind of come to us and say, what's your definition of a kind of process? How can we get going? If we stick to this process, we kind of then have a very tight rein on the project, but also the milestones involved. Sometimes we can step forward too quickly into modernization or optimization. So let's assess, let's do some pilot migrations, let's optimize and modernize. This isn't the old terminology of lift, shift, and modernize, because actually within it, we can divert different work streams, 6 R's type of conversation for those people on the call, so we can pick out the right applications, the right workloads for the right place. We've got some great white papers around cloud and how to do cloud wrong. One thing is to do cloud in that perspective. Just do it as a block. Just throw it up there. We'll modernize it later. We're all like little elephants, aren't we? We've got quite short-term memories. And problem is then the CFO comes and knocks on your door about 12 months later and goes, wow, this cloud's expensive, isn't it? It's because customers haven't got the foundations right in the first place. So it's really important to try and follow a process if we can. So I wanted to kind of show one of the funding processes. So this is AWS's, and I presented this at .next last year. So this is a really well-founded, really, I'd say, mature process to bring customers along to the journey in terms of migration, modernization, or in terms of DR, all of the things we mentioned before. So this process is called MAP, for those who know it, and we have 3 stages to the process. I'm only going to go into one in detail, which is assess. So the assessment part of this process is really important. So as part of that, we will work with your organization over a period of 2-3 weeks in some cases, sometimes a little bit longer. We can do workshops, we do tooling, and we basically present you with pretty much what we call a business case for change. So Sales and ET Works will work with you and will present you a document which has value, which basically says, look, this is where you are now. This is your options to move forward. These are the costs, predicted costs. This is where you are in terms of maturity, skills, etc. And you then have that document and you can say, right, I'm good. The reason it's important is certainly, I'm going to take AWS as an example. In most use cases and most engagements, that is a fully funded exercise. So you get something of high value with no cost. Can't commit to that. Okay, so in most cases, depends on scale, depends on size, depends on your actual ability to work with us. But in most cases, it is a fully funded exercise. And it's fantastic because it gives you that paper, that set of information that costed to give you to the point of making a decision to move to the mobilize phase. Mobilize, in some cases, is a commitment. So there is a minimum spend for some cases for mobilize. In some cases for engagements, in this case, over $500,000 of ARR. That's annual recurring revenue from an AWS perspective. If it's under that, there is actually not a commitment to move forward. So we can, again, go even deeper. So in the case I mentioned before, for the hospital, for the NHS Trust, we moved all the way through this process with no spend from the customer. So we had a fully migrated customer in 3 weeks, just over 3 weeks. That was a weekend at the end of that. And the customer was fully funded all the way through. Other programs at the bottom, just acronym city. I won't go through them, but there's many other funding programs from the hyperscalers to help. And please engage via ETWorks. If you want to go into that any deeper, any of the collateral that you want sharing, so example business cases, example statement of works, blah blah. We have those in space to share.
Perfect. Thanks, Ross. Yeah, so I'll just jump into the NC2 demo, but first I'll go through a couple of slides just to round off everything that was really said. So again, yes, Nutanix, we are a software company, hardware agnostic, just run on top of these x86 servers. We are a true hybrid cloud extension for managing your applications across private and public clouds. So this is really aimed to do it without any retooling, replatforming, any retraining as well. And that can be burst onto either AWS, GCP with Google, or Azure as well. So again, if you have Nutanix on-prem, it's the same software that you would use to manage it from the cloud, for edge sites as well. So if we look here too, like you have the same people, the same tools, and the same processes across all of your your deployment planes here with Nutanix. So once you have experience with using Nutanix as a platform, you can manage your entire infrastructure regardless of where you want to run it here. So this also gives you the choice to have workload mobility as well. So once you use this platform, you can have it on-prem, the private cloud as well, run it on edge or any robo locations that you may have too, and also again with public cloud or managed service providers as well. And for this example, we just have Azure, but we can also do it with AWS, GCP, as been mentioned throughout the presentation. Just a quick look at a more deeper level or more technical level here. Here is kind of where we can see how it looks like in terms of architecture. So first of all, you'd have your Nutanix Prism, so the control plane that would manage everything here. So your on-prem, your private cloud as well. And then once you get up and running with your Azure cloud, so you connect with it through either Azure VPN or through ExpressRoute. And then once you connect to the virtual network you have here, you can see here you have the Nutanix Cloud Clusters, or NC2, and that's run on top of these Nutanix Azure nodes. So just this example for Azure. So with these workloads here with NC2, they're really at the doorstep of all these Azure services. So all the very best of the Azure services you have here, like all these different Databricks, blob storage, SQL, all those Azure storages or services are really at the doorstep for these workloads with Nutanix. And here is where it's managed from here. So that's kind of an architectural overview of it. Now I will move over across to a demo of it. So again, this is what it is like from Nutanix's Prism. So we've got the NC2 control plane here, or part of the control plane. And how we really run this is here we have, for example, an organization, and this can be if you have a global business, maybe you can have an organization for UK, maybe for somewhere in the US too. But we really do this by starting off with organizations. So within each organization, we have different cloud accounts, and these cloud accounts, again, they can be multiple different providers that we have out of the three main cloud providers. So for example, here we've got Azure and Google so far. But for example, you can have an Azure account that may be for production, or another Azure account for DR as well. Or maybe you want to have Google for test and dev too. So here we can really have a full overview of all of these different deployments that we may have across the multi-cloud environments too. And this helps us as well with RBAC. We can have a look at the different users that we may have across our environment, assign them to different teams, different permissions as well. And if we want to have support, what access the Nutanix support can have as well. So we've got all the different authentication here with all the users too. Again, we've got audit trails, so you can see across the different clusters within the environment, notifications, tasks, and then just settings of your current environment too. But again, this is a demo environment, so we don't really have a lot set up at the moment. But yeah, so that's it. You can have multiple different cloud accounts within your environment, and we can start with one here by creating a new cluster. But when it comes to creating a new cluster, it's super simple. It's just a couple of steps that we'll just walk through now. And then once you finish these steps, you're essentially will have a cluster up and running in around 2 to 3 hours. So quite simple in that sense too. With the cluster naming this, so just name what cluster, whatever you wish to be called, what organization it will be a part of. So I just have one at the moment. And then the cloud provider we have here. So again, we have the 3 different cloud providers. I'm just going to go with Azure for the moment because we've got stuff set up with Azure. Again, if you want to have multiple different cloud accounts, you can, but here we just have one, so we can select just this one single cloud account that we have here. Then we can select what region we have here. So here you can see all the ones across the globe that we have. We're just going to throw into the UK South one for the moment. And here we have 2 different availability zones that we can select from, and we can just go ahead and select one of those. So that's just the general setup first. Nextly then, as we kind of spoke about earlier with the software and licensing, so we've got the 2 options here with the general purpose one with regular Nutanix Cloud Infrastructure licenses, so it can be purely core based, and we've got license portability too as well. And then we also have the virtual desktop environment too. So that will just depend on the number of concurrent users we have here, but typically we'll end up using for the core based one here that we have here. So the different software tiers that we'll have. But for VDI, it's typically done on users. So we'll have to list off how many users are being used there in that virtual desktop environment. So yeah, once we select here, so we'll just go with general purpose, whatever version of Nutanix's AOS and Nutanix operating system that we're using, the software tier that we may have, and there's a link here that will have the software options of what features are there. And then if we have any add-ons that may be included, so like for Pro here, there'll be a couple of add-ons that we may want to have in the software tier. We can just tick them off as well. So that's with the software licensing. Next then is with the capacity or the different host configurations that we may have. So because we selected Azure, here we've just got the one host type here. So it's the AN64s. And here we can see just what a single configuration for the host is like. So this one here is 64 cores, a terabyte of memory here, or RAM, and then around 37 terabytes of raw NVMe storage here. So with Nutanix, it's really recommended to have a minimum of 3 hosts. So we can have this here up to 28 hosts, I believe. So that's what we can go to for definitely with Azure. But we'll just stick with 3 for the moment to keep it simple. And we can see here the number of hosts, the total core counts, total RAM, and also the raw storage too. With AWS, we can do heterogeneous clusters, so we can mix and match the different node types that we may have within our environment. So that can be done here too. But currently for Azure, we just have this one node type available at the moment for this particular availability zone. Fault tolerance then, again, if we have the RF1 or RF2, how many nodes we can afford to go down, if that may be 1 or 2, and we can set that configuration there as well. Next then comes to networking, everyone's favorite part, I'm sure. So we've got 2 options here with networking. Now it's typically most companies would go for using existing networking resources, especially if they've already got footprint within the cloud. But we can have either creating new resources here, but when we start with existing resources, we're already prompted to kind of like a landing zone with our resource groups and our different subnets too. So here we have some subnet or resource groups that are already created. So the resource groups that are in Azure to manage other different resources. We just select whatever resource group we want, then connect that to the VNet, the virtual networking that we saw in the previous slides. Whatever virtual network has to go there, to connect the NC2 and Azure services. And then we have a dedicated subnet that's for that. So that's really for connecting the controller virtual machines and any management services within Nutanix too. Then nextly with the cluster access here, so how we want to communicate the access to the cluster can be done through the Azure VPN or through the express route if you want. And then we have the option to see if we're using virtual WANs or if we're not. So next we can continue to that. And as was mentioned earlier with the Prism Central configuration, so with the Prism Central being the control plane on how we would manage our Nutanix environment through Prism, we just have to deploy whatever size Prism Central that we have here. So you've got a choice between small, large, and extra large. It just depends on what you're actually running currently or what you will be running in your environment, and depends on the size of your cluster. Whatever PC version it is, and then a default username to log into that, just to start off with as well. Nextly then again with the virtual networking and the subnet here, we just have to have a dedicated virtual network to that, and as well a subnet for that as well for the Prism Central. Once that's done, then we go to our final step, which is our flow virtual networking. So this is really our gateway, which acts as the bridge between a Nutanix cluster and through Azure native networking as well. So this is deployed on a VM basis. So here we've got a gateway VM, and it can be done on a small or a large one here. So we can have up to 4 VMs. So with the small VM here, we can do it from 1 to 4 as well as a large one too. But here you can see the network bandwidth. If we do decide to go for a large one and 4 VMs, it's up to 64 gigabytes per second, which is absolutely massive. So it can cater for a lot too. So I know it's small. Even if we just have 1 small VM, it still has 10 gig, which is good for HCI as well. So same applies for this. Then we just have to have an external subnet to reach any external traffic, of course, and then manage that internally too with an internal subnet too. Finally, then we just have to have we can have a key pair here, so we can use an existing one or create a new one. We just have to get whatever resource group it is in the name of it, or else we can just use an existing one that's mentioned here, so that you can SSH them to any express routes later on across deployment. So once that's done, you're prompted to a summary of everything here. You can make sure everything's okay, take a screenshot of it if you wish. And yeah, if you do want to make any changes to it, you can, and then you just simply create it. I want it right now because it'll take a few hours to do. But yeah, so once that's done, in around 2 to 3 hours, you have a new cluster up and running within your organization, and you're good to go with this NC2 on Azure deployment. So that's really that in a nutshell, the Nutanix Cloud Cluster with Azure anyway. For that example, we can have obviously done with GCP and AWS, but if that's it, I'll have any questions there. And again, there will be a test drive sent out, and that'll be more of a guided walkthrough of what I just shown you. So you'll have a step-by-step guide on how to create a cluster, how to set up an organization, or even adding cloud accounts as well. So that's just a quick 10-minute demo of NC2, and I'll leave it open for any questions unless John, Franz, or Ross has anything to add.
No, thank you, Callum. As they say, a demo is worth 1,000 slides, right?
Absolutely. I'll also leave this slide open here just in case.
Yeah,
but yeah.
If anyone has any questions, please do put them in the chat. Don't be shy. There's no such thing as a stupid question. Unless John's asking the question, then it might be a stupid question.
Yeah, it probably will be if I'm.
That was a statement for everyone else, not for you, John. You don't.
Sorry. What was NC2? It's worth saying. It's worth saying as well, Callum. Once that, although it takes 2 or 3 hours to build the cluster, the minute that cluster's available, we can literally start migrating VMs directly onto the cluster.
Yeah.
Using the various tools.
Yeah.
The slight clarification I would put all of this is we talk about the simplicity and single click and whatever else, but just like when we come and deliver a Nutanix cluster in your data center, we have a bunch of services around that to make sure that what you have is exactly what you want in terms of networking and configuration and everything else. That's really where Ross and the team and ourselves help you build that the original kind of landing point within those clouds, to make sure as you spin up those clusters, they're giving you what you want. 9 times out of 10, the absolute complexity is networking. Everything else is fairly straightforward.
Yeah, that's why we got Ross here. Ross and his team are experts at networking, and they make it simple. So just a few things I wanted to comment on, just for the clarity of those who are listening. The Nutanix Move tool, first of all, there's no cost associated. I mean, there was a time when you paid an awful lot of money for a tool that could do what Nutanix Move can do, but there's no cost associated with that tool. And it's a bi-directional tool. I believe they're adding more features now where you can actually reverse your migration if you don't like Nutanix. Now, I don't know any customers who use that, but Nutanix is not about locking you into an ecosystem. It's about giving you freedom of choice. So even the Move tool will allow you to move back out of Nutanix, should that day come, which I think says a lot about Nutanix's confidence in the quality of their product and solution. And then maybe on another point in terms of how the cost model works from an NC2 perspective. You've essentially got the bare metal host cost component, which would be from Azure, AWS, or GCP, whatever those metal host costs. And you can run smaller clusters than 3 for test and dev purposes, but 3 is really your entry point. And if you consider, and then let me just complete my first statement, and then on top of that, you've got the Nutanix software layer, which is licensed by the number of cores, right? The underlying cores is your typical licensing. So you count up the physical cores. Let's say it's 108 cores in the 3 nodes that you have, and then you license those. The bit where the sort of cost saving element kicks in, really only kicks in after you've consumed that baseline resource. Now, that means if you've got a very small number of VMs, I'm talking sort of less than 50, then NC2 might not be cost effective, but it does depend on the size of those VMs, and it does depend how they would consume those 3 hosts as your sort of entry point cluster in the cloud. But anything above that sort of number, I have customers that have migrated 50 to 75 VMs into the cloud. They've realized about a 20% cost saving on their current Azure/AWS costs. When you start going into the hundreds of VMs, you can very easily and very quickly get to a 50% cost saving. That's just based on our experience. And we'd be really happy to do a TCO with you. If you give us your workloads, we can use Nutanix Collector, which is another really good free tool. We pointed at your environment that's currently in Azure or AWS. It gives us a complete assessment of all the workloads that are there, how they're utilizing compute and storage in the cloud. That allows us then to model an NC2 cluster for those workloads, and then we can give you a complete cost breakdown. So both of your existing environment and of course, what your existing environment costs, but we can model those generically, and then also we can give you the actual cost for the Nutanix NC2 environment, so you can very quickly weigh the two up against each other. Right, there's a question about the test drive. Do you want to take that one, Callum?
Oh, yeah, with the test drive, how do we know if it's complete once we go through? Yeah, so literally with the test drive, it is just like a step-by-step guide with the NC2 one. So once you log into it, you'll be prompted to a list of different steps. It'll say 1 out of 30, for example, and you just literally go through it one by one, and it'll be listed off with you. So you can go through it, and then every time I think there's like 4 sections for NC2, and it'll just cross off whatever section. So there'll be like a little box in the bottom corner, and it will tick off whenever you've gone through X amount of steps, and what section you're going through to, and it'll have a title, like for example, creating a cluster, and then it'll go through all the different steps to doing that, and then deploying that cluster, and it'll show you the steps for that too. So it's just a step-by-step guide.
Superb.
Yeah.
So I guess to wrap up, just as a reminder, using the link on the screen or in the chat, and we're going to send you an email out following this, so that you definitely go and get a chance for us to Nutanix to send out a ridiculous amount of Lego cars. Please make sure you do that. In terms of another plug, next month, Nutanix have their and again we'll send the link out for this as well on the 26th of November. .next down in London. It's a day. It's effectively it's Nutanix's conference. There'll be everything from prospective customers, current customers, resellers, channel partners, Nutanix, the whole day is based really around education of the product. So pretty much whatever your use case is, there's people there to talk to and build that out. But if this is a direction you're thinking of, I would say it's well worth the time. You'll have all of the right people in the right room. There'll be a few announcements, but the thing you can draw from that is definitely being able to answer some of those questions in more detail. Like I said, we'll send that out on the follow-up email to this as well, so you have that. ETWorks have a stand there, so if you are coming along to .next, please come and say hello. Tell us how you got on and how long it took you to build your Lego car. Unfortunately, my poor wife had to build 3 of them, so it has to stay in my study now, away from everybody else.
Yeah, it's definitely worth going to .nexus last year. You saw how many people that were there. There was not enough seats for everyone, so there's people standing. So it's bigger venue than last year for sure. So yeah, it's definitely an event worth going to if you are out in London. And again, yeah, the details of that .next event will be sent out after this call.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to emphasize that, John and I had the privilege of going to the global annual Nutanix.next conference in Washington, DC in May, where there were about 5,000 customers from around the globe, coming to get the sort of latest and greatest announcements. That was the full sort of 3-day conference with, labs and breakout sessions, an amazing sort of download of what's going on in the industry, and truly the way it was received by customers. It was standing room only for the keynote sessions in the back, because it was just completely packed out, and the reception for the technology and what it's doing was quite amazing to see. I mean, everyone's been to IT conferences, and some of them are a bit meh, but this one was really was properly exciting. And I think that the thing that I like about the sort of .next on tour events, which are the sort of microcosm of that bigger event, is that you kind of get that download in a day. So it's really sort of high impact. You get all the major announcements and key information to equip you to really understand what's going on in the enterprise cloud space, and how Nutanix is reinventing the hybrid multi-cloud world. So yeah, can really encourage all of you to come to that event. Even if you don't come for the IT, just come for a bit of good fun. It's a really great event. We'll have some interesting speakers there as well. And of course, the best part is the ETWorks stand, as always. I'm sure John will have a whole bunch of other goodies that he wants to give away on the day, so don't miss it.
Superb. Well, unless I think that's the end of the questions. So look, I really want to thank you for your time this morning. If you do have any post questions, feel free to reach out to us and ask those. Like I said, we'll drop you an email with all of the details for both for the Lego car and .next just after the call.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. And yeah, get in contact with us if you want to run those NC2 POCs. Ross and his team are really keen to step in and help with that. So let's do it.